Next, we will go to Deputy Superintendent Angie Stallings. We have quite a few items here. Are you ready to?
I am.
Present? Okay.
All right. Thank you, Chair Huntsman. Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. And Jeff, if you could go to agenda item 5.1 and pull up the statutory changes due to budget changes document. In just a minute, I'm going to turn the time to Jill Curry, who helped do some research, and just for her to describe the process. But the next two agenda items we'll be presenting today are some background on work we've been doing as staff to determine or identify potential requests for statutory changes for the 2021 school year. Some of those are related to pending budget cuts that we're anticipating next week. And a couple are not necessarily related to budget cuts, but to support the LEAs based on information that we know. Also, we'll in 5.2, we'll be discussing some potential requests for waiver to board rule, and we'll talk about those in a minute. So first, I'd like it, Chair Huntsman, if it's okay with you, for Jill and I still don't see, Jeff, that you've got the document up. It's called Statutory Changes Due to Budget Changes. It's a spreadsheet. If you could please show that. And Jill will describe what research she did and how we came up with the two yeses that are on there. Jill, could you
Jill,
speak to that?
Are you ready to come on?
Yes, yeah, I'm here. So Jill Curry, Program Analyst, Utah State Board of Education.
Welcome.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk to you about the process I used to identify statutory changes for 2020 general session legislation. Like Angie said, due to anticipated upcoming budget changes, this would be changes due to the elimination of most of the new funds appropriated to public education in the 2020 session. So specifically, this relates to bills passed with a corresponding appropriation. So the basic method that I used to put together this list was to revisit each education bill that had an appropriation tied to it. And I examined the language around bill requirements and the availability of the appropriation. So in the table that hopefully you can see on the screen, you can see that most of the bills contain language that would allow the statutory language to remain even with no appropriation. So examples of that language include within appropriations made by the legislature and subject to appropriations. Two bills were identified as needing statutory changes due to not having this type of language. You can see those bills at the top of the table. So HB 114, which is that very first row, states the state board shall approve a benchmark assessment for use statewide by LEAs to assess the mathematics competency of students in kindergarten and grades 1 through 3. The next row below that, Senate Bill 73 states the state board shall approve a benchmark assessment for use statewide to assess reading competency in students in grades 1 through 6. And the state board shall contract with one or more educational technology providers. HB 58 is on the list as a maybe. This bill is funded through a general fund restricted account, which is not anticipated to be part of the budget cuts. However, if it is part of the budget cuts, then statutory changes would be needed for this bill as well. And with that, I'll take any questions or turn the time back over.
Let's see if there's any, I'm going to see if there's any questions for you, Jill.
Okay.
Checking hands. And thank you for doing this work. You're turning over a lot of rocks and trying to get us prepared for next school year and take advantage of this session. Not seeing any hands, so thank you.
I do have a question. This is Board Member Earl, sorry.
Oh, now I do see a hand. There you go, Board Member Earl.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know why I missed. Maybe there's a lag effect or something that hits on this. Board Member Earl.
There might be. I'm in Colorado in the mountains, so there very well could be. So so the language that's there is the language that would need to be changed. It's not, the language that's there is not our recommendation. Is that accurate?
Yes, yeah, that's accurate. So the
Okay.
language is there, was pulled straight from statute.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood why the highlighted was there. It wasn't our recommended change, it's what would need to be changed. Okay.
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
Chair Huntsman, may I continue now?
Yes,
Unless there's
please
more
do.
questions. And to answer your question, Board Member Earl, in just a moment, there's a separate document. If you look on Civic Clerk, which I'm not going to ask Jeff to show just yet because I'm still providing the background. But if you want to go ahead and take a look ahead of time, you can see that we've got draft 2 of a draft motion related to request for statutory change. And that will be the motion we're looking for in just a moment. So Jeff, if you'd now show the other document, which is actually in backup under 5.2, but there is one change in here that is also a statutory change. And you'll see on the top of this document that staff recommends that the board consider requesting the legislature to amend section 53F-8-303. This section of code governs the capital levy that local school districts are able to levy, and right now that capital levy is limited to being used for capital expenses such as buildings. And during the 2010 recession, during the 2011 and 2012, so 2011-12 and 2012-13 school years, the legislature previously allowed school districts to use their the revenue collected from their capital levy for maintenance and operation purposes or for general fund purposes. And we've had a request, Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones and I, to join the legislature's Revenue and Taxation Interim Committee next Wednesday. And one of the questions that they'll be considering is whether or not the legislature should allow and change that section of code to allow districts to use their capital levy revenue for general fund purposes. So that's one of the recommendations we have for you, is to support that, and we could report to the Revenue and Taxation Interim Committee next week about your support or not for that. And then the last section of code that staff recommends we reach out to the legislature about, and I apologize, it's not on either of these two tables, but Jeff, if you'll now open up that draft 2, the draft motion related to requests for statutory changes. The last one on that list is a recommendation to waive the requirement in section 53G-9-802. It requires LEAs to enter into a contract with third-party providers to provide dropout prevention and recovery services under certain circumstances. Because we had a lot of students and it was a kind of a unique time period with COVID-19, we think that the measurements that we currently have in statute and board rule to trigger that requirement might artificially be higher than normal. And so we recommend that for this next school year, LEAs not be required to contract with a third-party provider for those services. And we've got staff that are familiar with each of these programs that are also available for questions, and I'm also happy to answer questions. But you can see the motion there on the screen, the staff recommended motion, if you have questions.
So, Angie, could you speak to the capital levy piece where we as a board have already talked about that in the past? In fact, it was part of our lines of defense in case of a recession and other things that we were trying to move forward in the last session.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Thank you for refreshing my memory to remind the board that this last session, you'll remember HB 357, which was the bill that created the stabilization account and a new structure that's dependent on the passage of the constitutional amendment this fall. Part of that legislation would have provided this flexibility anytime we had a recession of sorts, the way it's described in the bill is of course more analytical, or it's not as intuitive to describe right now, and I can't remember the exact language, but essentially if we had a recession, that it would allow the board to signal and tell school districts that for the year or years during that recession, that districts would be able to use their capital levy revenue for general fund purposes. So the legislature supported it, and it was contingent or will be contingent on the constitutional amendment passing this fall. But we would like to have it for the 2021 school year. If we wait, that may not be available until the school year after, if we wait for HB 357, because it's not in effect yet.
And can you speak to, I understand there's already a bill file opened.
Actually, I'm not sure about a bill file being open, but the revenue.
Snow was.
Oh, okay. I wasn't aware of that. So thanks, Chair.
All right. Yeah, it was brought to my attention today.
Great.
All right. Any questions? Okay, Board Member Janet Cannon.
Yes, Angie, as I understand it, the revenue generated by the capital levy is what school districts use to build buildings and, all of those kind of things. Can you tell me what type of things that they might transfer the use of that funding to that would come under the school district's general fund?
Yes. So the school district's general fund can fund anything. So probably the largest portion of what a school district's general fund funds right now would be salaries and benefits. It's supporting the salaries of the educators and employees who support schools.
Thank you.
So if I might take the liberty to weigh in, when I was on my local board, back when this was allowed, it was a huge lifesaver, and not all LEAs will access this, but it's money that legally can be put into the general fund or anything within that general fund, but mostly it is used to protect salaries and employees and programs, and it's up to the LEA and the local boards to make a determination whether they go into that. Of course, the whole intent is to build buildings, but in a time of crisis and stuff, they have that revenue there sitting, and they can put some of that construction on pause to prop up education. And I would
Yes.
turn my mic on, but my video, but I'm not seeing it. I can't even see where I can mute myself now. That is odd. Okay, any other questions from board members? So the staff recommendation for the motion was that the board direct staff to work with legislators to make the recommended changes to statute. At this time, any board members want to make a motion? I'm looking for hands. Board Member Thorpe.
I'll make that motion. Do you want me to read it out?
Or you could say so moved.
So moved.
Okay. Is there a
Board Member second.
Who is the second?
Belknap.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Belknap's back with us. So the motion before the board is that the board direct staff to work with legislators to make the recommended changes to the statute. Discussion to that motion. I'm not seeing any, so let's vote. Board Member Belknap, are you by phone, I presume?
Yes. Yes, I vote yes. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Hanson, are you back with us? Board Member Scott Hanson? He was in and out of cell coverage. Board Member Marsh. There we go. The voting is complete and the motion passes unanimously with Board Member Scott Hansen not on the phone to vote and Board Member Scott Nielsen not with us. Thank you. Angie, do you have anything to conclude?
Yes, so this is on the statutory changes. I just wanted to make one, just kind of give you a point of information based on some conversations I've had with legislators and legislative staff. If you, so we've got these 4 items here, as well as a couple of items from motions you've made in previous months related to requests for statutory changes. I clarified or asked a member of leadership as well as staff about when they anticipate undertaking or dealing with policy changes versus budget changes. And the feedback that I was given is they're trying to minimize as much as possible the number of policy changes or statutory changes that are needed. And they have identified, one staffer told me, hundreds of policy changes that are likely to be made or need to be made potentially based due to the budget cuts that might occur or budget adjustments that might occur next week. And so right now they're trying to limit those that actually trigger maybe revenue coming in or revenues, kind of more of the tax related triggers or restricted account triggers, not so much some of the changes that we just took action on today, although I could see potentially the capital levy one making it into a bill next week. But the others, there's a chance that they would not be made, the changes wouldn't be made until August, an August special session, which I've been told is fairly likely to happen. What they said they would likely do is make the budget adjustments and then reach out to legislators who were sponsors, especially of some of the 2020 legislation, and ask them what they think they'd like to do with some of the requirements, and then address all of those in August or even wait until the 2021 legislative session. So I wanted to give you that heads up because although you've made a motion now for us to work on these items, don't be surprised if only one or none of them make their way into a bill next week. They would likely come in August or later. So Chair, is it okay now if I move to 5.2, the board rule waivers?
Yeah.
Okay.
Unmuted.
Oh, yes, thank you. I'll move forward. So, and now,
It's
Hang on,
Carol.
there's a question.
I-
Board Member Lear.
Thank you. Sorry to be rude, but I seem to get overlooked. I had a question, Angie. You said there, according to the staff, there were hundreds of potential policy changes. Could you perhaps give me some examples of those? And then second, similar to that question, part of that question is, are any of the school fees changes going to be involved with that?
thank you for that question, because I realize now that I said that, most of the hundreds of policy changes I'm mentioning are not education. So we're talking about any budget adjustments related to human services or, DWS. I mean, there's so many bills that passed during the 2020 session and many had a lot of appropriations attached to those bills. So we, when you say hundreds, so some of these, if you go back, and I don't know, Jeff, if you can go back to the other document that Jill reviewed, you'll notice that we've listed pretty much every bill that passed during the 2020 session. The good news is that the majority of those bills that passed had a subject to legislative appropriations clause in it, making it so that we could keep those policies on the books until a time when they could be funded. So an example of that would be, well, the one that you see here, we've got HB 114. And Jeff, are you able to hear me? I know that Jeff has had some internet problems today. And so he may not be able to.
And
I think-
don't worry about taking a lot
Okay.
of time. I 2 or 3 examples so that I had in my head what you thought of, they thought of as policy changes versus what I might think of as policy changes. That's what I was looking for.
Well, 2 of them are 2 that you can see that you just voted on, which is the requirement to have a mathematics assessment in the early grades. That did not have a subject to legislative appropriations, and we need the money to do that. I think there was like $300,000 appropriated for us to procure that assessment, and then the LEAs would use it, so they wouldn't have to buy the assessment. So that's an example of, due to a budget cut, if the money's not there. Same with the other elements of HB 114. We had in there money for professional learning. We had money going to higher ed institutions to pay for the pedagogical assessment costs. So that's an example there.
That's good enough. That helps. I'm always a little cautious about what someone thinks of as a policy adjustment and what I think of as a policy change. So I appreciate the examples. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, I am not seeing any other
Okay, great.
hands up, and my controls kind of changed. So Vice Chair Brittany Cummins, if I'm missing something, weigh in. I've lost my video, but I still have audio. So, all right, so please continue, Angie.
Okay, so the next we're to item 5.2, which are requests for board rule waiver or flexibility. And you've got on your screen, you can see the document that Jill and I prepared with the support of staff. You can see there's, I think, about 46 items that the staff reviewed and provided input on. So what we did to start this document is we started with the list of requests for statutory changes and requests for board rule waiver that you had already approved for the 2019-20 school year, to see if, okay, here's some flexibility we provided for the 19-20 school year. Do we think we will need that same flexibility for the 2021 school year? So you can see that of the list, there's really only 3, and one you just took care of with the last motion for the statutory change. And we identified 2 programs that right now we anticipate needing some flexibility. So the first one is the Beverly Taylor Sorensen Arts Program, where that rule requires the board and staff to notify LEAs of how much money they'll be receiving under the Beverly Taylor Sorensen Arts Program by June 1st. Because of the pending budget changes, and the Beverly Taylor Sorensen Arts Program is in a unique situation where in the 2019 school year, they had some one-time money that was given. And so they're unsure about how that program might be impacted. So we're going to be, you'll see there's a motion in a moment to request a waiver from that rule to extend that deadline from June 1st to July 15th. Then the second item on there that has a yes next to it is related to the concurrent enrollment program. And in lieu of doing a waiver at this time, we are actually going to request an amendment, have a staff recommended amendment to this rule. It's going to be R277701 in your July meeting. That rule, the 713 and 701, were just recently reviewed by the Standards and Assessment Committee, and will be coming to the board in July. And so you'll see an amendment in July based on what we found out. I'll just give you a brief summary of the issue. There's a provision in there that states that the superintendent may not distribute concurrent enrollment funds to an LEA for reimbursement of a concurrent enrollment course for a course that's repeated by a student. We had a number of students this last spring, winter, that withdrew from their concurrent enrollment courses, so they didn't complete them, but they withdrew. And so we've got some of our higher ed institutions who are are interpreting repeating a course differently than we would. And we've been interpreting it to mean repeating means the student completed the course, received a grade, and then is trying to repeat the course. So we're going to ask for a definition of repeated to be included in the board rule so that if a student withdraws from the course before finishing it, that the student would be able to take it again, or, they haven't completed it, so that this would not impact their ability to take a concurrent enrollment course in the future. The rest of them, you can see there's quite a few here. Many of them are maybe too early to know, and there's a number that are no later on in the list, and much of that has to do with changes, for example, to licensing provisions, and I think just the fact that now we have people who will be anticipating some of what we didn't anticipate in the spring, we're able to plan ahead. So that's kind of the list that we're working through. We'll continue to provide you updates. There's a motion that we have with respect to the Beverly Taylor Sorensen Act program. And then I'd also like to, after that, I do have a bit of a presentation or an update for you on our work related to the 180 and 990. And the last thing I wanted to let you know is we did ask Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones did give some BAs also some access and sought some feedback from them on that list. And their list, they also had everything as maybe too early to tell or no. So it looks like for now, this is all we've got, but we'll continue to work on it. So there's the draft motion that the staff is recommending you make. And then after that, again, I'd like to talk about the 180-day, 990-hour requirement.
Okay. So Deputy Superintendent Stallings, you will have that opportunity under like an informational piece to talk about the 180, 990. So
yes, thank
you
you.
have this under an actionable piece. So taking a motion or questions from board members, Board Member Cannon.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to make the following motion. Due to pending budget adjustments to the fiscal year 21 budget, the State Board of Education waives the requirement in subsection R277-490-4 that the board designate an LEA or a consortium for Beverly Taylor Sorensen Elementary Arts Learning Program funding no later than June 1st annually, and extends the deadline for staff to notify an LEA or consortium of their eligibility for program funds to no later than July 15, 2020.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second from Board Member Thorpe.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Discussion to the motion. Board Member Earl.
I just had a question on the date, the July 15th. I'm assuming you've probably talked with people, just wondering if that is enough time based on the fact we're not sure on the funding for some of the, this particular program yet. Is that going to be enough time, or is this based on previous years funding?
Thank you, Chair. Could I answer that?
Yes, Deputy Superintendent Stallings.
So the special session, as you know, will be next week. It's June 18th and 19th. Assuming that they make all of the budget adjustments by next Friday, and even if they were to go into maybe the next week, early, I guess the 19th, 20th, so on, I'm sorry about the dates, but that our staff feels like they'll need a little bit of time to work with our financial ops staff to make sure we know exactly what funding we have available. And our staff plans to notify LEAs even sooner than July 15th. They'd like to get the information out to LEAs ASAP and are very anxious themselves to get them that data. We just wanted to get the expectation out there to the LEAs that it would be no later than July 15th, but we're hoping it could even be as soon as the week after the special session or earlier in July.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to make sure we had an adequate time frame. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands, so we're going to vote on this. The motion before the board is that due to pending budget adjustments to the fiscal year 21 budget, the State Board of Education waives the requirement in subsection R277-490-4 parentheses that the board designate an LEA or a consortium for Beverly, Taylor, Sorensen Elementary Arts Learning Program funding no later than June 1st annually, and extend the deadline for staff to notify an LEA or consortium of their eligibility for program funds to no later than July 15th, 2020. Okay, let's all, at this time, board members, if you please vote.
Board Member
Board-
Belknap, yes.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Belknap's a yes. Board Member Scott.
Board Member Hanson, also yes.
Okay, thank you. And I don't believe we have Board Member Scott Nelson on. Okay, the voting is complete. And the voting is unanimous. So this motion passes. Thank you, board members. Deputy Superintendent Stallings, this is an informational piece that you're bringing forward, so there won't be any motion on this, but can you give us a little bit of an update? I'm not sure
Yes.
if you have a presentation on the.
I do. And Chair Huntsman, I think that Jeff would like to switch presenter roles over to me for this presentation.
Okay.
Jeff, would you like to do
This
that?
will be our last.
Yes, it'll be fast.
Item. So, Jeff and Holton, would you please switch that over?
Or Jerry.
Yes.
I believe Jeff might be out. He's been having some major internet problems. Okay, now I am the presenter. Thank you. I will go ahead and start. So board members, you may have received some questions, and could someone just verify that they are able to see the presentation?
I can see it on my screen. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So this is just an update to let you know that there are questions about what will happen with the 180-day and the 990-hour requirements that we have in 419, and to give you an update on the work that staff's doing. As you all know, R277-419 currently requires LEAs to provide no less than 990 instructional hours over a minimum of 180 school days each school year. And with COVID-19, we saw how that changed a bit as students moved from receiving their instruction in a classroom and started to receive their instruction at home and outside of the presence of a teacher. So as staff, we've been looking at what might need to change with respect to the 990 and 180 for the 2021 school year. So just wanted to let you know that the previous work that's already been completed by the board, which will help in these efforts, you'll remember that, well, some of you will remember more than others, that in 2016, the board made some amendments to R277-419 to allow an LEA to use a continuing enrollment measurement other than the 10-day rule for purposes of calculating a school's student membership. What the 10-day rule is it assumes that you're attending every day. If a student misses 10 days of has 10 unexcused absences, then the LEA has to remove that student from their records or their membership roll. And so in 2016, we provided that flexibility to LEAs to use something other than a daily attendance check in order to demonstrate student enrollment in that school. And then just recently, you'll remember that the board amended R277-419 to redefine some key definitions in that rule, and the definitions are attendance validated program and learner validated program, which really goes to show that we're starting to have a shift between we can have programs or membership be validated through attendance, or it could be validated through the learner's progress along either competencies or finishing projects or logging in to a system or having some face-to-face or virtual, I guess, interactions with their teachers or fellow students. So that's the work that you've already done in that can support us moving to rethinking what the 180 and 990 look like moving forward. So some of the things that we're doing as staff, we've had many meetings internally to discuss this issue, and we created an internal work group of staff that includes program staff, policy staff, financial ops, data, and our IT staff, of course. So we've got a good cross-section of USBE staff kind of tracking what work is being done in this area. We also recently, a group of us met with LEA stakeholders on how they are using different continuing enrollment measurements other than a daily attendance check to support the demonstrating that they do have students that they're engaged with and that are on the rolls of their school. And that was really helpful. And we'll continue to meet with that group, especially in a moment. You'll see some of the options that we're considering and why that stakeholder group will be very important. And then the last thing we wanted to let you know is that we are going to be in a few staff and probably one board member and some representatives from the governor's office and the legislature are going to participate in a workshop with Excel & Ed. It's called Delinking Traditional Seat Time from State Funding in the COVID-19 era, which we're hoping to learn from some of our colleagues in other states, as well as Excel & Ed, on ways that maybe we could rethink the 180 and 990. And so just right now, here's some of the options that we're considering, although it may end up being that there's something we haven't even considered yet that we end up making a recommendation to you all on in a later board meeting or committee meeting. But the 4 potential options that we are looking at right now for the 2021 school year would be, the first one would be just to maintain the current 180, 990 standards, but provide guidance and support to LEAs on how to implement a continuing enrollment measurement other than attendance. And that would be potentially providing a model policy, providing guidance, FAQs, et cetera. The second would be potentially waiving the 990 hours only, but requiring LEAs to continue to provide 180 days of instruction. The third would be to redefine the 990 hours to be hours of educational services in lieu of instruction, attendance, or student time requirements. You'll remember that we made mention of that in 419 in our the waiver that we had for the time period between March 16th and July 1. We still had an expectation of them providing educational services through the end of their regular calendar year, even if that meant that they weren't doing traditional instruction. And we would bring that to you in the form of a rule. And then last might be completely redefining a new measurement for financial reporting and measuring student engagement in schools. So that's the presentation. Just mostly wanted to give you that update that staff is working on this, and we anticipate bringing recommendations to you soon. And we can provide you updates at least no later than the July board meeting.
And so we'll probably bring this up in our executive meeting, whether we put this in a committee meeting or board meeting. So thank you for it. It is a hot topic to a lot of people, and there's quite a bit of work, but of course there's still the board's work that needs to take place. That opportunity will be forthcoming. Questions, comments from board members? Board member Lear.
Thank you. I do appreciate your work, and I appreciate the creativity that must go into this. I have 2 concerns. These are just an overlay for what you're thinking. I'm sure it's nothing brand new, but important for me to say and express. As you process this, the staff processes this to bring it back to the board. I will repeat something I've said before. I feel like there's the possibility of the board being sort of caught in a trap or backed into a corner through no bad intentions, where the board is comfortable with LEA flexibility, but suddenly an accountability demand from the legislature. And I'm just very concerned that we are able to provide or have the LEAs provide services that are accountable to the board, but that are also accountable in a satisfactory process to the legislature, so that we're not in a difficult triangle. And the second concern I have is, and I saw some of this during the the last few months of school that concerned me among family members, neighbors, and concerned is maybe not the right word. I'm not yet willing to just say I'm going with backpack funding. I'm not willing to say any student gets, services gets a WPU equivalent. I think we need to look at how that how those services are maintained through the school and not just funded without as much control or direction as they have been. I still support homeschoolers' rights to be homeschooled. I just don't support their right to take funding from students who actually attend school, and I'm using air quotes because attend now has very many pictures, and I just think we need to watch what that looks like and observe that, unless we're just going to give it up altogether. Thank you, and I don't need a response. Those are my two concerns going forward. Thank you for listening.
And thank you, Board Member Lear. Board Member Cannon. Your hand is raised, I think.
I'm sorry, I muted myself instead of unmuting myself.
Oh, there you go.
Okay. I have some concerns also, and I'm wondering if this might be perhaps a little premature. What I would like to know, based on anecdotal information that I've heard from teachers that I know about how few of their students really engaged in the online learning and really stuck it out to the end of the year, and how many students were more or less lost in the realm of online learning, and how difficult it was for parents to try to step in and fill the role of the teacher. I'm wondering, is there some intention to try to analyze or document how successful this attempt to go all online and remove face-to-face has been? Is this going to be something that we throw out the baby with the bathwater in terms of school days and instructional hours, and have something in lieu of instruction before we really know how our children fared in terms of their learning under this new scenario that we've constructed for them?
So were those concerns or questions?
Well, those are questions and concerns. If someone has any thought on, are we going to do anything to take a look at what happened and how successful it was before we start jumping into saying we're going to do this for another entire school year?
So, yeah. So do you want to answer, Deputy Superintendent Stallings, do you want to answer Board Member's question on the look back this last quarter on data regarding the online learning the LEAs were pushed into and participation? Is that part of what we'll be looking at moving forward?
Well, it's not something we've currently started looking at. I think it's a great idea. It looks like Superintendent Dixon might have something to say on this. I don't know if she's aware.
Okay.
We've actually have been looking at it, the digital teaching and learning team, and we've surveyed, we've sent out surveys. So one of the things, we know a couple of things. First, we know that from digital teaching learning initiatives, we had tools that went out, and we were far ahead of other states. There were some places in remote and rural areas that they couldn't ping a cell tower, so they didn't have access to broadband. So we know that broadband is an issue, and we're really leaning in everywhere that we can to make that a principle of equity. So broadband, number one. Number two, teachers have been trained over the years in digital teaching and learning initiatives to utilize digital tools in their classroom, but that has not translated the same way into a remote setting, because in the classroom, they can control for variables that they can't control for in the home. And in the home, you might have more than one child on a device, again, a broadband issue. Parents trying to work from home and be teachers as well. It's different in terms of independence for younger kiddos versus older kiddos. So definitely we've looked at all those variables, and those have been studied, and getting feedback from superintendents, charter directors, the 4 advisory groups that I have, they've all given me feedback about it. And again, there are other ways that we've been collecting that data. So it informs what it would look like in terms of remote. It's informing what it would look like in terms of blended. And our principals and LEA leaders really are the ones who have been collecting this data, and then they inform us. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you. Would we be able to see that data when some of these potential options might be brought to us?
I think we have it in narrative form, Board Member Cannon. I don't know that we have numbers, but we can certainly just bring forward those points and write it up in terms of where we got it from and what we know so far about the information.
Thank you.
The other piece and the data and the proposed betterments that might be for board consideration on the 180 and 990 is kind of coming from the education community that does the digital teaching and learning 24/7s, and those that do it partially to better address information will be coming forth to our board to better address the accountability pieces that both board member Cannon and also board member Lear were talking about. So I'm really looking forward to more information and more data and et cetera. Board member Earl.
Thank you. I was just going to make a comment that I know that in many cases, especially those that were already in this realm, it's highly successful of what they're doing online and such. And then I know that there were many families it was very complicated to try to transition and do a normal school day at home. So I think we need to do a mix here. And I would look forward to seeing the data as well that we're acquiring, so we can find where those successful moments were and allow the flexibility for others who want to move into that realm in some way to do that without putting constraints on them.
Thank you, board member Earl. Board member Gravitt.
Just a couple things. I wanted to respond to Janet just anecdotally that out of about 200 students, I had about 17 that I never saw any getting online, any connection. And then I had about 34 that didn't get enough for credit. But I think talking to some of them, I think one of the obstacles is kind of what Chair Huntsman was saying, that accountability piece. And I think going forward, we've learned that perhaps, instead of just putting it out there into the, the online platforms, maybe they do get on at a certain time. There is an attendance sort of component. I think I learned that. And I think a lot of us in the education community learned that. And then also, I think one of the things we can attribute to a lot of the success was, and this is a shout out to digital teaching and learning. In my district, we did the digital teaching and learning specifically with language arts teachers. And we did that several years ago, and we were already in place. We already had our Google certifications. We'd already done that stuff. And so those of us who were prepared, it was so much more seamless, and it really wasn't a big adjustment except for that we were missing our kids. But otherwise, that was huge coming from the state board. That really benefited those of us who'd gone through that. So anyway, just a little perspective on that.
Thank you, Board Member Gravitt. I'm not seeing any other hands, so thank you, Deputy Superintendent Stallings, for bringing this topic up, and it's kind of a precursor to some more work that we'll be doing and adjusting ourselves during these, as we're sailing through these unique times. So thank you. Did that conclude your report, doesn't it? Did you have
Yes, it
anything to
does.
add, Deputy Superintendent Stallings?
It does. Thank you, Chair.